Ankur Patel, thank you for being here. It's really nice to be joined and to be chatting with you about automation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack.
Yeah, of course. This is awesome. So the goal of this conversation is really just to ask some questions that provide insights to people with regards to your space, so automation and insurance and finance, and to understand how you went from 0 to 1 and a little bit about your story. And so with that said, I guess I'll just start by asking you, how did you get started in automation?
Yeah, I think my story goes many years back. I started my career in finance. So I used to be a bond trader at Bridgewater. And the challenge with being a bond trader is that you're crunching a lot of data, both qualitative and quantitative data. And you could imagine as a single individual, part of a small team trading big markets around the world, you need to create different types of automation to make your job easier. And so back then, it was 15 years ago, we were using VBA, so basically Excel spreadsheets with macros to go and help us crunch numbers. We then morphed into using data science and data engineering, so using proper code to go and create some automation to help ourselves crunch numbers more quickly to be able to trade markets. And basically, I followed that thread over the last 15 years, and as you can imagine, the capabilities have gotten really, really good. So
Yeah.
instead of just crunching numbers in a spreadsheet like Excel or via data pipelines, now all of a sudden you can do a far more complex work. And so I've just followed that automation journey for myself, and then now doing that on behalf of our customers in finance and insurance.
Very cool. And so insurance and finance, you mentioned you had a background in quantitative analysis and qualitative data and things of that nature. I'm really curious to ask you about how like the regulatory, how regulation and how that poses maybe issues or even unique opportunities. Because generally speaking, right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but generally speaking, it's like when there's a greater barrier of entry, there's, by virtue of that barrier, there's less competition, which creates an opportunity to create a moat around your services, right?
That's exactly right, precisely right. So in terms of company building and just like kind of the backdrop here today in automation is that there's going to be a lot of work that is simpler to automate. Think of like the automation that you and I need in our personal lives, booking airplane tickets, canceling reservations, doing some background research on a purchase. You could basically prompt a large language model like OpenAI's models to get answers. And it's not a regulated space like you and I are just asking basic consumer like questions. It could be good enough and we could run with it. And, worst case, like even if the answer is slightly wrong, it's not going to have massive consequences for us. When you talk about regulated spaces, so insurance and finance, the bar for how high quality the response from the AI needs to be for you to actually run with it is insanely high. And you need to not only do that because you have reputational risk as a company, but more importantly, because it's a regulated space, you have regulators that will penalize you if you make mistakes using software like AI. And so not only do you need very good results from AI at a very high bar, but you also need to be able to prove out what did the AI consider in order to get to a particular response. And so if you can't trust the AI, you can't use the AI because your regulators won't allow you to use it. So you're absolutely right, because the bar is so high, because you have so many hurdles to jump through, it creates an opportunity for founders like myself to build a business, given that it's not going to be something that like an Anthropic, a Google, OpenAI, or an XAI will be able to do just directly with their models.
Sure. And so can you give me an idea of how exactly you went from 0 to 1 in those spaces or in the insurance and finance space? Like how you deal with the bureaucratic burdens and regulatory hurdles and all of that?
Yeah, so when we started multimodal 2 years back, we had to build a lot of the building blocks to go and do each leg of the automation that we do on behalf of customers. So, the use cases we serve are things like claims processing, insurance underwriting, a lot of lending and diligence operations in banking. And for each of those workflows, you need to be able to handle what are called document-centric work. So you need to be able to parse information from documents with very high fidelity. Because if you don't do that, if there's an error rate there, it's going to compound as you decide to make decisions off of those documents, or you decide to prepare, loan documentation or a quote or a claims report. So for us, we had to go build building blocks to extract information from documents, to make decisions, query against those documents, ultimately to help support the diligence and decision making that professionals do in these spaces. And more importantly, on the regulatory side, we had to build out security features. So how do you keep the data secure for each customer directly in their walls? You have to build governance capabilities. So basically, you need to be able to affirm what context did the AI use, why did it use a particular context to take a particular action? So you could kind of think through the steps that AI took to ultimately get to an end result. And then we had to build a lot of trust capabilities around confidence score. So you know when you should go and double check what the AI generated versus when can you run with it. And for us, like all of these building blocks around security, governance, trust, along with the raw capabilities to get high fidelity outputs from documents, these were essential. So once we built the building blocks, then it became easier for us to go and package that into a platform. And that's where we are at today. We did a lot of the hard foundational work around building these primitives and building a lot of these core capabilities. And then now we're in the market selling to carriers as well as banks.
What should non-people or non-technical people who working in insurance and finance understand about the impacts, whether they're good or bad, about automation?
I think the number one thing that I would call out and I recommend is it's really important for business operators to not get caught up in the technology itself. I realize it's a very technical space. There's a lot of like just hard science here and math that's involved, but I think the goal here is to make AI intuitive so business operators can start seeing what is automation able to do today, presently, and then where are things headed. And I think the experience, like taking reps, practicing like that muscle on using AI in their work is going to help them unlock kind of insights as to where could AI be helpful in its current state and where is AI not yet mature. But those learnings need to be there. And I think that is going to help develop more rapport and trust so people can use AI, so business operators can use AI to see where AI can be helpful to their lives. And then over time, that muscle compounds, right? So like that muscle gets built out. It's something that we do as consumers. Like you and I probably use ChatGPT and other similar platforms a lot more than we did 2 years ago, but it took us time to figure out how to go and leverage that software, incorporate into the daily work we do as individuals. The same paradigm is there for business operators in these spaces. They need to practice the muscle. So practicing directly with the automation tools that they have access to, that's the number one recommendation I have.
Awesome. What kind of jobs do you envision might be eliminated, or even what opportunities might arise because of the impacts of automation in these spaces?
So I think the number one thing is that all roles across the board will change, right? Um, I don't know like how many of them will truly go away, but the nature of the role itself will change. So I'll give you an example. Today, a claims handler and a claims adjuster, they spend a lot of their time reading in documents. So like a claim submission comes in, like say an auto claim happened, you get the police report, you get an estimate from the body shop, you might get some other like damages and insurance card like policyholder data submitted. Reading in those documents is something that people ought not to do, right? Or they shouldn't have to do that. That's like something that an AI can do, and it's inherently very like admin type of work. And so no longer will claims handlers have to read in documents. They also won't have to do the preliminary checking of, do I have all the information to proceed or not? Who do I route it to within the team? A lot of that AI can take on. And so a lot of that work will be offloaded to AI. And the same individuals will be able to hopefully mature into a role where they're actively doing more active diligence, looking at what happened in that circumstance, who's at fault, who should they rule in favor of. So they're going to have to do more critical thinking, more higher value work. And so I think that's where net new jobs are created, right? They're able to go and spend more time in areas that potentially they're not spending enough time on. And some of the low lift, low cognitive load activities are going to be offloaded to AI and automation. So we kind of see that pairing of AI alongside people, and every single person today, regardless of their role, will have a small team of AI agents working on their behalf.
Awesome. So it's like less, repetitive work in terms of like parsing information from documents and things of that nature, and it's going to evolve into like more, critical thinking, like you said. Just to parrot that back to you, am I understanding that correctly?
That's exactly right. That's
Very
exactly
cool.
right. Most of the administrative work is going to be offloaded to AI. and then people are going to be doing more higher critical thinking work. Now, I think that's something we have to go and navigate, which is like, what critical thinking work do people spend more time on that they otherwise couldn't because there was so much admin work that got in the way?
Right, totally. So if someone's like a non-technical person in terms of like automation and AI and things of that nature, you know, you're talking about the impacts that this space might have. What should they be like trying to learn or focus their energy on as, you know, this space is evolving and as those impacts are, you know, invariable?
Yeah, I think a couple things they should spend time on is, now I would really purchase a subscription to start with all the major AI platforms. So like ChatGPT, Claude Code is a great example, Perplexity. The reason why I recommend using these tools is because you could really get up to speed what state-of-the-art AI out of the box could do on your type of work. Now I realize there's like security things that you have to be mindful of, so you're not going to take a claim submission and just throw it at ChatGPT. But you know, I would really push on your enterprise leaders, your you know, kind of your institutional heads that can make these purchase decisions to go and get software like over the line so you can use it and test it and see what type of outputs you could get to go and facilitate, you know, basically like things like document extraction, some synthesis of the information that's in these packets, maybe helping with some of the decisioning that needs to be done. You start understanding a lot more of like where AI could be helpful and where yet it's still not quite that helpful. But like this is how you start getting adoption. So I always say like the technology itself is very capable, but you need to test and try and experiment and develop trust. And that's what I call like umbrella term change management. You need to have change management that's done framing how you can imagine work using new software. And if you do that well, then I think you rework and redesign like what your work looks like on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. What makes an industry more or less vulnerable to these impacts that AI and automation might have, in your opinion?
I think the industries that are more like cognitive, right? Cognitive work, so like brain activity, they're actually the most what I call susceptible to AI having a huge impact. Where AI is struggles is what I call the real world, the physical world. I mean, you're seeing a lot of work being done on robotics and such, but inherently it's something that's harder to automate in some ways. But I think a lot of cognitive work, so white collar office work in finance and insurance and healthcare, and these are spaces that are going to dramatically change. I will say, like even in those domains, though, the simpler workflows. So think like marketing work, like outbound marketing, code generation. Some of that is getting disrupted today, where some of the more complex work around like deep credit diligence, it's going to take time to get there.
Oh, and what do you mean by deep what diligence? I didn't catch that.
Deep like credit diligence, where you need to have accumulated like decades of experience looking at deal rooms to go and evaluate a particular M&A transaction. There's just a lot of know-how that AI is not privy to, that you as an investment banker would be privy to and could better assess. So I think where the domain expertise is really high, and it's specific to your field and maybe even your company, I think that's going to get disrupted less. But like if you're doing code generation that is more general purpose, that's getting disrupted as we speak, right? And you're seeing the effects of that pretty quickly right now.
What advice would you have to those people who are getting disrupted as we speak? I think you touched on a little bit of this earlier, so apologies if this is a bit repetitive, but
No, no, but I think the frame here I would say is like people that are wary of testing and using AI are the ones that are going to get disrupted the hardest. So my recommendation is lean in, right? Because like you're going to lose your job, quote unquote, or your role to someone that is using AI more proficiently, right? And so that's the worry, is like lean into the AI trend, test and try and learn, because if you don't, that's when you're most susceptible. If you do a good job of adopting AI, yes, the way you do work will still change, like the nature of the role will still change, but you will have evolved with it. Last thing you want to do is like fight this trend, because then all of a sudden the role will have changed and you won't know how to use the new tooling to be effective in the new role that's coming about.
Sure. Yeah, that's kind of like a tale as old as time. Like if you look at social media and the businesses that, were romantic about, the old way of doing things and slow to advertise on social media or post or make content or what have you, it's the same type of concept, right? Like those are the
Yeah.
first people to go, essentially. What are your thoughts on low-code integrators who sell solutions using N8N and Make.com to businesses?
Yeah, there's been a huge like rise in agency
Yeah.
businesses that leverage like the N8Ns and the
Yeah,
yeah the
it's the agency
makes.com to
model. Yeah.
yeah. In some ways, I think they're. I mean, I'm like really in favor of them in many ways because I think what they do is they help unlock some of the low-hanging fruit around automation, because they know how these software platforms work, and they go in, understand the business use cases, and they set up the business use cases using these N8Ns of the world, and I think that unlocks some value right out the door. I think we're big proponents of these N8Ns because like they have a lot of connectors and integrations built in, and it makes the job of like delivering value to a customer easier. I will say that there are hard limits around what's possible. So some of the most complex work, like the work that we talk about in insurance finance, you can't do using N8N, right? It's just like not able to have that context and awareness to be able to operate there. But I still think for a lot of companies on a lot of different workflows and use cases, starting with these agencies to get going is really valuable. At some point, though, if you're a large enough company, you want to bring that expertise in-house because it's not just about building it as a one-off. You need someone to maintain it and evolve it as the technology itself gets better.
Yeah, sure. I guess one of the reasons I ask is because I've been spending a lot of time and energy learning Make.com and a little bit of N8N over the last like 6 months, and just trying to. I sold a couple like very basic flows, just using like going on Upwork and sending like looms to job posts, and I'm currently helping a friend of mine automate certain aspects of his local catering business. Um, but for someone like me, like I don't necessarily have like a super technical background in this stuff at all, and so I think there's been that struggle. And so I guess I'm just curious to kind of know like, what types of individuals would you recommend like going that route and trying to sell solutions to businesses in that way, and versus like who might not be so adept at that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, what I would recommend is like if you want to build a business around automation, for example, I think leveraging the makes.com, like make.coms of the world is a great place to start because it's intuitive, simple to build a workflow. There's a lot of like drag and drop visual editors. You don't need to know how to code. And I think it's a great way to get going, right? And as a buyer, like of business and work that agencies like this do, you could start getting value, particularly if you don't have a technical team or you just don't have the bandwidth to have people on your own staff to go and use it like a make.com or N8N. I think that the other big trend that I would like maybe point you and others to is like there are a lot of low code, no code platforms like a Lovable or Bolt or Replit or VO, like a V0 from Vercel that I think are very good at allowing you to use text to then generate code to basically either create automation or create apps. And that's another great way to go and understand how AI can be used to create software that could be helpful in a particular business. So I think the more experimentation that you do today, the better the learnings, and the better the learnings, the more you can get value from some of this technology that's coming down the pipe.
And do you have any like specific advice for how someone without a technical background might increase their ability to like wrap their head around this type of highly technical stuff? Obviously, you mentioned Make.com is more intuitive for beginners,
Sure.
but is there any other like tips you would have to someone who's like really interested in trying to become proficient, or at least proficient enough to hedge their bets accordingly, given the impacts or potential impacts in this and really any space?
Yeah, I think so. A couple things. And one is like what I said earlier still stands. Like use the ChatGPT's perplexities, Claude codes of the world. I think the more familiar you are with the agents and the LLMs who are coming down the pipe, the better. The other big thing is I think YouTube is a great place to go and see how people are vibe coding, for example, or leveraging these workflow automation platforms to create value. And so you don't want to be in isolation. You don't want to learn on your own. You want to leverage what others are finding, like in terms of value that they're seeing getting unlocked. And so that is really great place to go and assimilate new knowledge that is more publicly available. But the last thing is like you want to have real use cases that you could test out the things you've learned. right? So whether it's for your own personal benefit that you're just testing and trying out, or for a customer or client that you serve, the more you could be hands on keyboard trying to do some of this, the better. I will say that what AI's done, it's leveled the playing field in some ways, because you could be non-technical now, and if you have good business know-how, you could go as a non-technical individual, leverage AI to serve business need without having that deep technical knowledge. Now, if you have that deep technical knowledge, I think it makes you even more dangerous and capable, but it's unlocking new ways of delivering value as a non-technical individual.
I think that's fantastic advice. Thank you for sharing that. So you're obviously, a very technical founder in this space and a frontier in this space. And I'm curious to ask you, like, where you personally experience any like confusion, fear, or overwhelm while building in this space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that generally the space is moving super fast. So for someone like me, I obviously run a startup, and I spend a lot of my time just thinking about our own technical challenges in our product and our go-to-market motion and such. But, even though that's my day job, another part of my day job is just being aware of what's happening in the bigger ecosystem. So what are all the foundation model companies doing? And so I follow the major foundation model companies very closely. I also follow the hyperscalers and what they're investing in, what they're delivering through their cloud platforms like AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. I spend time looking at other startups that are emerging or are building in an adjacent space, because there are a lot of good learnings from that, right? Like, so for example, Harvey and AI, right? They're a major player in AI, or Glean, for example, that is doing enterprise search. I mean, there are good models that you could learn from, like what are they doing well with their go-to-market or with their use of technology. And so for me, it's like trying to get good parallels from adjacent verticals and then incorporating that into how we also build more quickly, right? In some ways, like I think copying is really important right now. So what you see in adjacent spaces that's working well, you want to copy some of those features and capabilities, and then you're going to add your own version on top because you're targeting a particular set of users in a particular vertical that's different. But the more you could assimilate information from others and then build it into what you're doing, that's deeply valuable. So I spend a lot of time doing that. And I think the other thing that I'm really focused on is how do we serve business users and business operators better? Because I think what is happening is AI is getting even more complicated. It's kind of crazy to say, but it's like AI at the pace it's moving is getting more complicated. That even if you're deep in AI as a technical individual, you realize like there's so much going on that makes it hard for business operators to get value. So another big thing that we're focused on is simplifying the usage of AI so a business operator can get to value more quickly.
Sure. So we've talked a little bit so far about like the broader impacts and things of that nature with automation in these spaces. I'm curious if you can give like a specific example of a lesson that you had to learn the hard way while building in in the finance space.
Yeah, I think one of the hard things for us, like throughout really our past 2 years, was trying to figure out, how do we build a platform that's going to meet the rigor of IT and engineering and InfoSec teams at the banks and carriers we serve, while still being intuitive for business operators to use. It's almost like you're selling into two different segments. One is like more technical. They want to understand the architectural diagram. They want to know observability, like all the deep technical stuff that you'd imagine. But the business operators, they don't want to necessarily dive into any of that. They have their teams that they turn to go and verify that it checks all the boxes, but they need a simple, intuitive way to get going, and they need to get to value very quickly, right? And so we have to marry the different experiences. And so a good way to think about multimodal today is like we are an API first platform. So we have great APIs that are available for technical teams to use to do integrations and kind of get all the value from everything that's built out. But we have a very intuitive user interface with a really beautiful user experience that allows business operators to define their workflows, provide feedback, start getting value even before the integrations are done, right? And so we have to build something that is just hard for two different type of users with different requirements in mind.
Sure. Are there any common things that people or companies who are trying to build in regulated industries tend to get wrong that multimodal might do better?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, including like us, right, in building, the thing that we often get wrong is just how bad data generally is at very large organizations. It's not that they don't have data, they have a lot of data, but it's all over the place. And despite a lot of efforts to get that data in order and make it functional for training purposes, for one reason or another, like data is just going to be hard to obtain. Maybe there are infosec things that are hard that make getting access to data tricky, or it's stored in a lot of different legacy systems and maybe there's some partial migration that's happened. But getting good, clean data to get to value quickly is always a major challenge. And I think that's a bar and a hurdle for basically any automation company, despite the vertical. And I think we've had to rethink about how do we build the data asset from scratch, leveraging existing data where possible. But like if you don't have data that's very clean and curated to begin with, we need to help you build that asset for yourself. And the good thing about AI today is that it needs far less data to be really effective. So that's helped us because a smaller, more curated data set is more valuable than a very large, very messy, very dirty data set. And so we have to rethink how we go and provision data for some of the work that we do.
That's very interesting. This might be a bit of a silly side question. Is that kind of the crux of when people talk about structured data? Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Some of that is, yeah. So, structured data itself could be messy depending on how it's stored and such. But I think the other element that I think, Jack, is really critical is like semi-structured or unstructured data. So data that hasn't been parsed in some sort of structured format, you want to make sure you parse that with high fidelity. And if you don't, then it doesn't matter like how great the LLM is, it doesn't have access to high fidelity outputs from the actual unstructured and semi-structured data sets, and it can't be effective. So I'll give you an example. In banking, there are a lot of sell side diligence items that involve tables and charts and text, and it's all messy and it's just all over the place. You want to be able to handle all of the charts with high fidelity, all the tables with high fidelity, and all of the semi-structured text or unstructured text with high fidelity. And if you don't do all those legs well, then when you feed that into different large language models, they're not going to be effective because they didn't have access to the underlying data with high fidelity in order to be able to do downstream work.
Awesome. That's a terrific answer. All right. So far, we spent the last 30 minutes or so roughly talking about the broader implications of AI and automation, a little bit about what you do at Multimodal, but I really want to get a little bit more specific about the company that you've been building for the last couple of years. So can you start, I guess, by explaining what you guys do at Multimodal as if you're explaining it to someone who isn't necessarily super technical from a high level?
Yeah, absolutely. So Multimodal, we've built out a software platform that allows business operators to start defining the work that they do around lending, underwriting, and claims processing in a way where by explaining in plain English, like plain text, the work that they do, and then sending in documents, the software learns how to do that work and is able to then ask the human operator, the business operator, for feedback. So basically, imagine you get an application for a mortgage that comes through and you're a loan officer. You can specify what use case you have, which is mortgage loan origination. You specify the documents in, again, plain text. The AI is basically doing work on top of those documents. So classifying the documents, pulling information out from things like bank statements, driver's licenses, passports, tax returns. And it's then asking the loan officer to provide feedback. And then what we do is we take the feedback automatically and we then make the AI smarter at doing this work. And when you go through what I call a few dozen cycles of this, you then get an AI that performs this work really well that you can then leverage to get your work done more quickly. So in a nutshell, it's a software platform to allow you to define the AI coworker, AI agent that you want working alongside you. We then focus a lot on making it intuitive for you to supply feedback. And then we incorporate that feedback all behind the scenes to then help you do work with the precision that you need, right? And so you could think of it as almost like a factory to help design coworkers for very sensitive applications and use cases within finance and insurance.
Awesome. Okay. So on your website, it talks a lot about agentic AI as opposed to, let me ask you that, as opposed to what other types of AI?
Yeah, so I mean, you could look at AI like generative AI, right? It's just like large language models that are generating responses for things like content generation or maybe answering a question. I would say like agentic AI agents, the kind of the break there is that these AI agents are performing work. They're taking actions. So they're not just like a co-pilot, like a chatbot that's giving you answers. It is legitimately doing work in the ways that you would do work. So a good example, going back to the lending example, is a mortgage application comes into your inbox. The AI agent is listening to that inbox, notices that an application with supporting documents came in. It then does the preliminary work. So it looks at all the documents, classifies the document types, pulls information out, does some preliminary decision making, saying like this is a good credit opportunity because certain ratios are met, certain FICO scores are there, and it then puts it in front of the underwriter in their like loan origination system for them to review. So you can see how it's not a chatbot that you have to ask questions on and get responses. It's legitimately doing work along kind of a workflow, like a process, and then getting to the final end state and then seeking review from a human operator. So that's the difference between agentic AI and then like what I'd call prior generation AI, particularly generative AI, that was more chatbot-like in its consumption.
Sure. And I also want to ask you a little bit that I just thought of. There's been a lot of hype, I guess, lately about MCPs or Model Context Protocol. How do you like see that like fitting into the broader picture here?
Yeah, so I think MCP is incredibly valuable. First, because a lot of companies have standardized around it. So, it's like Anthropic and Google and others have like basically adopted it, and so it makes it easier for there to be adoption because everyone's kind of like pointing to the same bit. But I think the number one thing that helps unlock is that you have good context that you then bring to the large language model. By context, I mean information that the AI needs to be aware of in order to perform its work. So MCP allows you to then connect different contexts, think like different software platforms, different like drives, different email engines, and it's connected to that more quickly through MCP to allow the AI agent to traverse all of that context to then get to the right action and take the appropriate action. So think of it as like before you had AI that didn't have any context to work off of except for what it was trained on. And now it has context from different software systems that you have in your organization. It connects into them, using MCP as kind of the connective tissue. And then it's able to leverage all that information to give you higher quality responses and take higher quality actions.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about what buy to build agentic AI refers to?
Yeah, it's a very important frame that we have, which is like, if you look at the whole build versus buy debate, right, which is typical in software land, buy means like you just buy someone else's platform and you just consume it as is. And build is like you build everything from scratch. You set up the infrastructure, set up the models, the tooling, kind of do it on your own. We think neither of those options work for enterprise. I think the build option, it puts a lot of onus on enterprise because they have to build everything from scratch. And there's a lot of hard build that has to get done and redone every single time across a very large enterprise. It's just very inefficient, consumes a lot of resources. Generally, a thing that I wouldn't recommend for most companies. And then the buy one, the challenge with that is you buy something that isn't completely fit to the way your organization works. It's too like what I call like pre-built, right? It's too opinionated in some ways. Our approach is what we call like a platform approach, which is buy to build, which is you buy a platform that has a lot of core components that are 80, 90% there, maybe 95% there. And then you're spending time building out the 5 to 10% that is very specific to your company, the way your company operates. And so it's flexible enough that you can go and put your secret sauce like to work, but you don't have to rebuild that 80, 90% that should be pre-built as part of the platform. And I think that is a really good balance because it gives enterprises the ability to go accelerate the thing that they would need to build on their own, but they have a software vendor that is helping go and do a lot of the 90% out of the gate, right? And so we think of it as accelerating the build timeline. You're still buying but we call it basically a partnership play as opposed to the vanilla build versus buy argument of old.
Gotcha. And so on your website, you guys talk a lot about how multimodal does or you refer to like the two common types of agentic AI being vertical and horizontal, right? Can you walk me through like the different, I guess, use cases? Like when should you use one versus the other, or even like explaining like what the difference is from a
Yeah.
high level?
Yeah, so all companies will use both. So I want to clarify that. It's not like an either or decision. So think horizontal AI as AI doing work that is going to be universally done across organizations. So I'll give you an example. Outbound email, right? Every single organization, regardless of whether you're in finance or healthcare or insurance or consumer, you're going to send out emails to do business development. That is a horizontal use case. It's going to be more or less similar or the same across verticals. And so you have horizontal platforms that enable that. Same thing with content generation, right? We all use X and LinkedIn and other platforms to generate, to distribute content. So you want content generation, it's more horizontal play. You use a horizontal software vendor to go and do that. And so these are like what I call use cases that span verticals. Vertical AI or vertical agentic AI is AI that is specifically to that vertical. So in insurance, the vertical AI use cases are things like claims processing. Claims processing are a particular type of workflow where you're looking at a particular set of documents with particular integrations you need to common workbenches like a Majesco, Duck Creek, Guidewire. And so it's very specific to insurance. Like that vertical AI platform is going to be useless to um, another vertical, like call it legal, right? Like a legal company is not going to care about claims processing because claims processing is specific to the insurance vertical. And I think you will need vertical specific platforms that understand that vertical, have integrations built into the common platforms in that vertical, have the regulatory compliance scrutiny well addressed in that vertical. And so for us, the verticals that we play are financial services, so finance and insurance. We don't do adjacent verticals because the adjacent verticals have different set of use cases and integrations that they need. So we stay within our lane and we go super deep. That also means that we can't do the horizontal use cases like outbound email and content generation. And so those are use cases that the horizontal platform companies tackle, whereas we tackle the vertical specific ones.
Gotcha. That makes sense. What are forward deployed engineers and why do they matter?
Forward deployed engineers, I think, first came into vogue with Palantir. So Palantir basically, started doing a lot of work with the U.S. government, like all the three-letter agencies. And I think what Palantir really pioneered was having an engineer or having even multiple engineers that would sit very closely, sometimes in the offices of the customer, to learn the pain and the business problems and the technical challenges that those businesses were having to getting the value from new up and coming technology. And so Palantir built a software platform, then used forward deployed engineers to work very closely with the customer, sometimes on site, to make sure that they were getting the adoption and integration they needed to unlock value from Palantir's core software platform. And for us, that's a huge part of our value prop, which is like AI is hard. It's hard because change management's difficult, like the adoption piece, right? Getting people to use it, making it a part of their day-to-day work, making sure the integrations to their core software platforms is there. And so we have a forward deployed motion, which means that we have engineers that work very closely with our customers to take our platform, set it up for the use cases that the customer has, and then to drive real outcomes. And I think that is so essential to do, that change management is essential to getting value from AI. I think it's one of the biggest reasons why a lot of AI dies in proof of concepts. You don't have change management built into the delivery model.
Interesting. Okay. Um, So can you give me a little bit more information about like what the life of an FDE is like, or a forward deployed engineer? Like what exactly like do they do and how do they do it? Like they're going out to spend time in a lot of cases with their clients, I guess. But I'd like to know a little bit more about like what that looks like, if you could explain that.
Yeah, so forward deployed engineer gets involved towards the later stages of a deal closing, right? So initially, when we do sales with the customer, it's usually an account executive that understands the pain that the customer's experiencing, what they've tried, what has worked or hasn't worked. And then what we typically do is we start understanding their pain, and we then set up like a proof of concept or pilot to show value on that use case. And then when we get that clarity as to what the pain is, we have a proof of concept or pilot lined up. That's when a forward deployed engineer comes on. The forward deployed engineer, it complements the salesperson, because forward deployed engineer is able to go a bit deeper into the business problem and the technical problems that the customers face. They go and collect data. They use that data to then set up the platform, and then they start showcasing value from the software platform to the end customer. So their work really revolves around spending a lot of time on customer calls, understanding the pain and experience of the customer. And then the other part of their time is setting up our software platform for that business problem that they've articulated, and then doing feedback cycles with feedback from the business end user, saying like, this is working well, this is not, to make sure that there's really good alignment between what we're delivering via the AI that we design and what the customer needs. And once that's done, then the forward deployed engineer also works with the IT and engineering team to make sure all the regulatory and compliance checkboxes are covered, and that the integration happens so that they're seeing real value in their day-to-day work that they do, right? So it's very like, what I call, it's like a very high empathy, high EQ individual that is also technically very strong, that works very closely with the customer to get them real impact.
Awesome. I guess let me ask you this. Are there any questions that I should have asked to this point that I haven't yet? I guess that's a bit of a loaded question, but I think there's a lot of like, I'm thinking of a lot of different like follow-up questions in real time, and I'm just curious to know, like, is there any like topic I should have like asked you about that maybe I haven't yet?
Well, I think one of the things that we should pull a thread on is just how quickly AI is moving, and I think that's forcing companies to figure out like, where can they build a durable business, a durable startup? Because I think one thing you're seeing is that the foundation model companies are insanely good at new product releases and new model releases. So you could think of like a lot of companies that people have tried to start or are starting that are no longer viable, because the thing that they tried to solve for that might have been a pain like 18 months ago or 12 months ago is no longer a pain, because foundation model companies just address that well,
Is it
right?
like add features and stuff you're saying that
Yeah,
address?
add
Yeah.
features, right? Add features. So like a good example is like, I remember 2 years ago, it was like people built startups where you could go and load in a PDF, because like ChatGPT didn't have good PDF coverage. And so there were companies that were cropping up just to like have a small little thing where you could upload PDFs and then you could chat with that PDF. All right. And it's like these types of like smaller features by themselves, they're getting incorporated directly into the builds that foundation model companies do. In fact, like if you look at vibe coding, even there, it's like these foundation model companies are coming out with their own vibe coding platforms. And so that challenges like companies like Windsurf, which got acquired by Google, and some of it got acquired by Cognition. It puts pressure on players like Cursor, even Lovable and Bold and Replit and such, because the foundation model companies are getting really good. So, and I think my big frame here is that product velocity really matters. No one has a product moat for that long. They have to keep going and iterating on the margin on how to make their product better than what is coming down the pipe from the foundation model companies. And of course, like if you go and solve a really like niche vertical or niche segment of a vertical, I think you could build a go-to-market moat that gives you some defensibility. But I'll say AI is not overhyped in my view. Like there are huge gains from AI that are being delivered, but the major question is that, where does that accrue? Does it accrue to hyperscalers? Does that accrue to foundation model companies? Does it accrue to the startups? But I think the important thing that people should keep in mind is like, this space is moving quickly. It's hard to build a durable business, and I think you should be really clear on where you are able to build your own IP and moat as you're doing company building.
So you mentioned like how quickly the space moves. How do you recommend people keep up?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the things that people should be aware of are happening through podcasts and YouTube videos, and then also going to like meetups and conferences where you have other fellow like peers of yours. If you're a business professional, you want to find peers that are also in your space that are like learning and trying to get familiar with the space. So I think a lot of it is being almost crowdsourced, as opposed to like being written up, right? Because by the time it hits the books, like if someone actually publishes a book, it's going to be pretty stale, right? So you kind of need to be on top of just like the major channels, YouTube, podcasts, even social media platforms. That's why I like having podcasts like this, because you're able to kind of share thoughts real time as to what is happening in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you like the last, 45 minutes to an hour or so has been a great learning experience for me. And I'm sure, just rewatching and going back to edit this will be even more so of a learning experience. So, yeah, and you have your own podcast that you do where you talk about, what you're doing at the company. And, well, I guess, I mean, what else, do you talk about anything else on your podcast, besides like what you're doing at the company and just like more broader AI stuff, or, give us
Yeah,
an
I mean,
idea about
so
that?
the podcast that we do isn't so much about us as a company. It's,
Okay.
I think where our real frame is that we're speaking to leaders in finance and insurance that are going through this multi-year long journey of trying to identify where AI could be helpful. And some of them have successes, some of them have failures, some of them are like, in between, like they haven't gotten enough like learnings and experiments in to go and like see what was successful versus not. But it's really important to speak to them and to help them kind of share their message, because that's where like a lot of learnings for us happen, right? Talking to the customer, seeing where they see value in AI, where that's emerging, where it's not emerging. And for their peers that are listening to the podcast, they're able to see like, how is my peer at X company thinking about addressing AI, all these things. And so, we kind of see it as a way to build our reputation and brand and build
Yeah.
trust and rapport with the customers we're selling into, but it's also for their own benefit to learn from one another, right? And these conversations are happening at conferences or for drinks and dinner. I think podcast is just another great forum for those conversations to happen in what I'd call even a higher impact way, because it's a one-to-many conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of sounds like it's, half of it is just like curating insights, like you said, from industry leaders so that you can more effectively build, I would imagine, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's incredibly valuable for us as we try to develop our product roadmap, right? Especially if you hear people kind of highlighting similar pain that still
Yeah,
exists.
right.
If they mention it a few times and it happens across a few conversations, there is something there, right? And you want those learnings to be happening real time. And we do that, of course, with sales conversations and such. But the podcast itself is another like what I call like a low stakes forum to get new learnings around the use of AI, where AI could be helpful, the pain that exists, things like that.
That's awesome. And before I forget, what's your podcast called?
It's called Pioneer. So the whole concept was, basically these business leaders were pioneering kind of new ways of work using AI. And so like they're really at the forefront of some of the change that's coming down the pipe in finance and insurance. So we want them to basically share their story on the field as it's happening real time.
Right, and I know you also have a newsletter that you have where you talk about your own day-to-day experiences and things of that nature. Where else can people find your work or find your stuff?
Yeah, so my newsletter is called ankursnewsletter.com. It's an AI newsletter. Been doing it for many years, and it really was a byproduct of all the books that I've published. I've done two with O'Reilley and one with Nvidia, and it's a great place again to stay up to date on things that are happening in AI real time. And then we also have a newsletter with our company that is more oriented towards finance, insurance, and regulated spaces. So would recommend both of those newsletters to people that want to stay abreast of all the things that are happening on the AI front.
I'm gonna have to subscribe to that one. I subscribed to yours. I catch for whatever reason the other one, but I'll have to do that. I just thought of another random question, and this might be a silly question, but I'm curious, like, who do you think should learn coding these days? Now that like you talk about Replit and all these other apps that make it much easier for non-technical people to implement code. Like, how do you look at that? Like, who do you recommend should still go out and learn code?
So I think there's deep value in learning code, mostly because I think doing systems architecture, figuring out like the principles of how to code, how code works. I think the value of learning that even conceptually is really meaningful, because
Yeah.
I would say like you could argue that like a non-technical person can get to the proficiency of like a single engineer, but I would say like if you're a superstar engineer, that gives you so much more capacity to leverage AI to become like go from a 10x engineer to a 100x engineer, right? And
Right.
so in order to do that, you still need to know the basics of computer science. I think that's going to still be a very valuable discipline. Except the change now is that you're going to be more of a mastermind, a systems architect, thinker, as opposed to hands on the keyboard. A lot of like managing libraries and packages and writing code, maybe even testing for code is going to be done by AI. But I think computer science as a discipline is still going to exist, and I would still highly recommend it to people that are, in undergrad or high school students and the like.
I think that's a fantastic answer. A bit of a personal question, and the last question I have, how old were you when you started learning code and getting into computer science, and what was that experience like, or what allured you to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, I was like just big STEM guy, so a lot of math, a lot of science.
Yeah.
And in undergrad, so I went to Princeton. I studied this major where you were basically doing statistics and math and econometrics, almost as if you were being trained to be a central banker, like at the Federal Reserve. And that's why I did finance at JP Morgan and Bridgewater and such. But I actually learned to code after college. So
Wow.
Princeton didn't have a major computer science division, at least when I was there on campus.
No kidding.
Um, and so like where I learned it was basically crunching numbers as an investor, finding better ways to use like VBA, which is basically code that you would use in Excel, and then learning how to use Python to do data science and data engineering. And then over time, like through the waves from 2012 onwards, learning Python and Scala and other things to get really proficient at generating code for myself as part of the work that I was doing in building software. And then, of course, the last like 5 to 7 years has been building teams, right? So I'm less hands on the keyboard now, although I really enjoy it, but it was really self-taught, right? And so that's why I really empathize with people that didn't get a conventional computer science background, had to kind of learn on their own. I think that if you have a conventional computer science background, you're even stronger for it. So do still highly recommend it based on, my own experience learning on my own.
That's a fantastic insight. Yeah, I got to be honest, Ankur. This was a very enjoyable conversation. I think I got a lot of really good insights, and I think as I go back and, like I said earlier, when I go back and rewatch this and do any edits, I think it's going to lead to a lot of follow-up questions. And so, yeah, this was very enjoyable for me, and I'm very grateful for your time today. Is there anything else that you'd like to thresh out here before we part ways?
No, I think that's all, Jack, and I really appreciate the time. Thanks for having me. Phenomenal questions, and hopefully these are good insights for your audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much.